What would you do if, while cutting the king's hair, a drop of blood slid down your razor, and the mistake could cost you your head? In the Middle Ages, the barber-surgeon wasn't just a man with scissors and a razor, he was also the improvised doctor, the dentist, the surgeon, and in many cases, the executioner in disguise. He didn't work only with strands of hair, but with veins, wounds, and living flesh. And the worst part? He did all of this inside castle, where a single slip could mean the end. The job looked noble, tending the king's appearance, shaving his beard, trimming his hair, and from time to time draining the bad mood of the blood, as scholars of the time said. But what began as vanity quickly turned into disgrace. The barber was the man who cut to heal, yet learned to see pain as routine. His hands trembled, not from weakness but from awareness. They knew any wrong move could turn the throne into an execution chamber. The castle walls hid the smell of heated iron, fresh blood, and candle smoke. The barber was summoned when no one else had the courage. He opened wounds to release bad humors, pulled teeth with pliers, stitched battle cuts, and bled the sick with leeches. There was no anesthesia, no asepsis, only faith, sweat, and screams. The throne demanded results and the barber obeyed, but something always weighed on him, because behind every cut was the risk of failing in front of the most powerful man in the realm. And when power bleeds, someone always pays the price. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, would you have the courage to be the king's barber surgeon? Comment razor if you've got the stomach for it, and drop a like to support the channel and keep uncovering the dark side of these cursed professions. Inside the castle, the barber surgeon was a curious figure, neither noble nor mere servant, just a man moving between luxury and horror. In the morning, he trimmed the king's hair, listened to his conversations, and pretended to belong to a world that wasn't his. By afternoon, he was taken to the cold chambers where the work changed completely. The same hands that cut delicate strands now cut flesh, and there was no time to hesitate. The barber had no right to err. One mistake could stain the throne room carpet, and stain his own fate. He was responsible for bleeding the sick, stitching wounds, and applying remedies that felt more like torture. In the Middle Ages, people believed almost every illness came from bad blood, and the solution was simple: remove it. The problem was this cure killed more than it saved. Many fainted, others never woke, and when the patient was a noble, fear multiplied. One wrong drainage, one vein cut too far, and the barber could end up hanged. The same tool that shaved a beard could sign his own death warrant. The corridors knew the rasp of metal being honed, copper basins filling with hot blood, the murmur of prayers the barber whispered before each cut. He knew he wasn't a physician, but he had to look like one. And the king trusted him because no one came closer to his neck than that man with a razor. It was a strange bond, made of fear and need. The barber saw the fragility of power every time the king sat before him, unarmed, throat exposed. And perhaps that was what scared him most, realizing that with a single stroke, he could change history and also lose his life. In towns and villages, the barber surgeon was feared and sought after at the same time. People saw him as a mix of healer and executioner. His stall was easy to recognize. At the door, a wooden pole wrapped in white and red cloth, the symbol of the trade, red for blood, white for bandages. That emblem survives today in modern barbershops, though few know it was born of pain. Inside, the smell of iron and burnt alcohol mixed with sweat and fear. He didn't just cut hair, he pulled teeth, stitched wounds, and drained pus. He worked with crude tools, sharp razors, hot irons, hooks, and pincers. No anesthesia, only courage and screams. Assistants held the patients while the barber worked fast, almost mechanically, trying to ignore the suffering. Blood soaked the cloths, the floor turned slick, and the metallic smell clung to his clothes, his hands, even his dreams. By sunset, he had seen it all. Mangled soldiers, sick peasants, cuts that revealed more than flesh. They revealed human despair. What many didn't know was that he lived trapped between two worlds. To nobles, he was merely a servant with tools. To the people, a dangerous man who carried the power to wound and to heal. That split tore him inside. Each life saved gave a little hope, but every death reminded him his craft was a curse. And still he kept going, because abandoning it meant defying fate. And in the Middle Ages, no one defied fate and lived. Over time, he was summoned into castles where the nobility demanded the same treatment as the common folk, with more luxury and less mercy. That's where the real terror began. The king's barber could not make mistakes. A bad cut, a bleeding too deep, a tooth wrenched the wrong way, any slip could be read as attempted murder. At court, a medical error weighed as much as treason. The man who used the razor to heal could lose his own head because of it. The setting was tense. He entered the royal chambers trembling, surrounded by advisors and guards. The king watched in silence, and that look was sharper than any blade. When the monarch fell ill, the barber gave first aid, opening veins, draining blood, applying salves that burned the skin. Real doctors from universities arrived only after the barber did the dirty work. If the king improved, the doctors took the credit. If he worsened, the blame fell on the barber. A cruel game where others' blood could save his life or doom it. The cold walls kept secrets he could never repeat. Sometimes he was called in the dead of night, quietly, to treat wounds no one could explain. Other times he watched the king order torture, and it was his job to keep the prisoner alive long enough to keep confessing. Each case was a spin of the wheel: save a noble and earn gold, or miss a cut and earn a grave. Even so, there he was, hands shaking, sharpening the blade that decided who would live to see the dawn. His days were marked by blood and silence. He spent hours honing blades by torchlight while moans and prayers echoed down stone corridors. To nobles, those tools meant healing. To him, they were instruments of torment. No anesthesia, and each cut performed to the desperate sound of human screams. Worse than the blood was people's gaze. Some saw a savior, others a butcher. Gratitude never lasted because in the Middle Ages, the line between cure and death was thinner than his razor's edge. Often he was called to handle what no one else would touch: pustules, open wounds, gangrene, infections that smelled like death. He drained pus with bare hands, boiled tools, in cauldrons, cleaned wounds with sour wine. When nothing worked, he applied cupping, cut off limbs, and stitched what remained. Some survived, most didn't, but the work could not stop. The next day, another body waited, another blood to wash away. Even so, he was indispensable. The king summoned him to cut hair, shave, and ask advice about his health. He was the only man allowed to touch the monarch's face without punishment, making him both privileged and a target of envy. One mistake, one rumor, one suspicion, and the barber might trade the scalpel he held for the blade at his own neck. In time, he learned the greatest danger wasn't only in the blades, but in the people around him. The king trusted him enough to let a razor touch his throat, yet distrusted him enough to place 2 guards at his back. One poorly judged stroke, one drop too many, and someone would whisper treason. At court, a whisper could be a sentence. He knew that with every shave he carried the king's life on. The razor's edge, and his own, balanced between duty and death. Rumors followed him through every corridor. Some said he knew too many secrets, others that his hands had grown cold from touching wounds and corpses. He was the kind of man everyone needed, but no one wanted nearby. And the more the king's power grew, the more fear grew inside him. Because deep down, being a barber-surgeon meant living surrounded by power without ever being able to wield it. He served nobles, healed soldiers, yet was seen as suspect. Part servant, part sorcerer, part healer, part killer. Still, he couldn't stop. Blood was his routine, fear his shadow. When he wasn't cutting the king's hair, he was bleeding peasants in search of purification. People believed removing blood cured disease, and the barber ran this macabre ritual. Each session left the floor stained, the air heavy, and his conscience more fractured. He knew that often what they called a cure was only a slow death, but who would dare contradict the king's medicine? Nights in the castle were long and hushed, and he hardly slept. He spent hours cleaning blades, sharpening tools, preparing cloths and metal basins. Each instrument had its own sound: the snap of a clamp, the whisper of the razor, the clink of iron on stone. To others, they were work noises. To him, they were voices, voices of those who had screamed under his hands. When wind slipped through the window slits, it seemed to whisper the names of patients he couldn't save. Some died in bleedings, others in amputations he performed himself, with the smell of wine and blood mingled. Worst of all was knowing death was part of the trade. If a patient died, fate was blamed. If it was the king, he would be. At banquets, nobles looked at him with curiosity and scorn. They laughed at the man who cut hair and veins as if he were something other. In a way, he was. He had a surgeon's touch but a servant's rank. He could treat war wounds but never sit at the table. A divided man, living between respect and revulsion. And the more the palace used him, the more he saw he was just a replaceable part. One mistake, and he'd be swapped for another with the same coldness, the same blade, the same fear. Even so, there were moments he felt powerful. When the king closed his eyes and offered his neck to the razor, the barber knew that for a brief instant, the kingdom's fate rested in his hands. One wrong move, and the throne would change owners. But he never dared. At yet court, power is an illusion, and those who touch it too closely end up cut as well. If you've made it this far, it's because you enjoy diving into the dark and real stories behind professions that time tried to hide. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. There's still a lot of obscure history hidden in the corridors of time. Leave a like to help this video reach more people who enjoy this kind of content. And comment the word razor so I know you stayed to the end and see what really happened behind the shine of crowns. Don't go yet. The next video on screen will take you to another cursed profession where blood and power ran side by side.